Welcome to Hope for Anxiety and OCD, episode 84. If you're just finding our show, I am your host, Carrie Bach, and our podcast is really focused on reducing shame, increasing hope, and developing healthier connections with God and others. Today, we're really focused on that third goal as we do a follow-up episode on boundaries. So back on episode 73, we had an episode about what are boundaries, why are they important with Erica Kessie. That was more of a ideological episode, more on the theory of boundaries. And this episode is going to be more practical. So I'm really excited to have found a guest who can walk us through the practicality of what it means to set boundaries. I know that this is a very important topic for people who struggle with anxiety and something that I'm constantly working with clients on, because when we don't have healthy boundaries, we take on too much and we end up becoming more anxious about it. It's interesting, kind of before we get into this conversation, I am in the season of no right now, which has been very interesting for me because I have had to say no to a lot of different things. I've said no to professional events and trainings. I have said no to personal meetings with people. And it's just reminded me how saying no to all of those things, because in my season of life right now, I have a 6-month-old, I have a husband with some health issues and some other family things going on, that this has allowed me to say yes to the people and the priorities that are most important to me, even though sometimes it hurts to say no because some of the opportunities that are coming my way are really good and things that I want to do. And sometimes it's just not the right season to do those things. Today, I have with me Kristen Boice. So Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Carrie, for having me. And in your intro, I was thinking this speaks to so many people to have the season of saying no so you can say yes to what matters the most in your life. And it's not always easy.
No, it's not. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have a group private practice with 15 clinicians. We specialize in trauma, EMDR, and brain spotting here in the Indianapolis area. And my passion is helping people feel centered in who they are, that it's okay. They have their own thoughts, feelings, opinions, and they're able to have a voice without feeling guilt and shame over what they need, what they want, and having more clarity, confidence, compassion, calm in their life. So that's really what I feel passionate about, and helping people really find their center, find that anchor point within themselves so they can feel more confident in their decision-making and less self-doubt. I find a lot of people doubt, even when they set a boundary or make a choice, then they're like, ooh, are they going to be upset with me? Did I make the right decision? Was that what I should? Was that what I should have done? So that's what I feel really passionate about. And then I have a podcast called Close the Chapter, where we focus on closing what doesn't serve you and opening the door to possibilities.
Good. I like all of that. That all sounds really great. 15 people is a pretty sizable group practice too.
Yes.
I'm sure that did not happen overnight. You have stuck the course and built the thing.
That was definitely Holy Spirit led. That was not me. Yeah. I'm just the vessel, and my team is very centered in that. And that's really at the heart of what we do. We're just the vessel to help people find the healing. So it's not one of those things that I went out and created. It kind of created itself, so to speak. I mean, yes, I'm managing it, but really, I never solicited one of the clinicians. It was all God led. So it's really been remarkable to be a part of it. And it's been an honor and a privilege to walk clients through the healing journey.
Absolutely. I'm curious for you, like when like we were talking last episode in terms of identifying that a boundary needs to be set, like maybe an internal feeling of anxiety or anger. What internal cues do you personally experience when you know, like, okay, it's time for me to set a boundary here?
My body will tell me the cues. So I might get a pit in my stomach. I might get that. Oh, I can see, for example, you have a family member that you know is going to activate your nervous system and you can see them texting you or calling you. And I can immediately feel that in my nervous system, that butterfly in my stomach or that adrenaline rush, or that my body might even tense up and my shoulders or my jaw might get tight. So my body is the first thing, my nervous system, to tell me to check, because it can zap your energy. If I'm not protecting that energy, that can wipe me out from being the mom I want to be, from being the partner I want to be, the wife, the leader of the team, the best clinician I want to be, if I'm putting my energy towards something that's going to zap me.
Yeah.
So I've learned energy is so important. And if I don't honor that, then I don't have it to give where it's most important to me.
Yeah. And that's so relevant in terms of self-awareness, of just us being tuned in to what our body is trying to communicate to us. I really believe that God gives us that for a reason, just that internal sense to be the first cue. And I'm just curious. I know I've talked with clients who have said, I just don't even feel like I have the right words or the right language, because maybe boundaries were never modeled for them in their family or in other relationships. What kind of help would you give those people in terms of like tone of voice and word choice that we want to use, like when we're setting boundaries?
This is the one thing I feel so passionate about. We'll even do role play. Like, okay, I'll be like, you'll be you. I'll be the person you're setting the boundary with, so they can get more comfortable in their own nervous system to say it. So the first thing I recommend, kind of the first step, is take a deep breath. Because we want to anchor in and feel centered. So I'm like feeling your feet on the floor, kind of feeling yourself present in this space and this time. So it might take 3 or 4 breaths to get kind of centered, to get the courage to say what you want to say, to get the clarity. And I encourage people, the second thing is, if you're nervous about it, to write out what you might want to say. So
That's
for
good.
example, so let's say your mom is blowing up your phone. You're like, I love you. I will say the acknowledgement sandwich. I love you, and I can't talk right now. I will text you when I have a moment, something like that. And the I love you, and it's not an I love you, but, because the but kind of erases it, kind of feels manipulative. So I like to do the acknowledgement piece first. You don't always have to do that. Or let's say someone invites you to do something at school and you say, thank you so much for asking, and right now I can't. Let me know the next time and I'll see if I have the space or the time.
Yeah. What you're doing really is creating a positive on the front end and the back end for people. I've heard some people say that, I don't know if they call it the compliment sandwich or the criticism sandwich, something like that, right?
I call it the acknowledgement sandwich, where you're acknowledging that the person's intention was pure on the other side, like they want, and it's not always, but for example, if like the school wants you to volunteer for something, you can understand that they need volunteers.
Sure.
Like, I know you really need a volunteer, and I so wish I had the time to help. And unfortunately, right now, I don't. Thank you so much for asking. That intention, kind of acknowledging that intention on the front end and setting what you can and can't do. That's the boundary.
Yeah.
What can and can't I do? It might even look like, thank you for asking for me to bring, I don't know, XYZ. I can't bring that, but I can bring chips and salsa. Like, so I'm saying what I can't bring, like I can't make a homemade dish right now and homemade brownies. However, I'm more than happy to bring chips and salsa. So you can't say, I'm giving you kind of benign examples, but you can offer like, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do. Those are nice framework. And the tone of voice. So if it's more of a harder boundary, for example, it might be a family member might feel really activated or triggered by that family member, and really taking the deep breath. And if you cannot respond where you're going to be more intense and maybe have more of an angry response where you're not going to be real regulated, I always recommend take a pause. When you do feel like you're more centered in your response, maybe you pray over your response, you feel more clear in your tone of voice. Texting's so hard, but if you're saying it verbally where you can soften your voice a little bit, you can still be clear and direct. People are afraid, I don't want to be nasty. You don't have to be nasty at all. I can be very loving, but very clear and direct in my boundary. So I know you really want to connect right now, because that's why they're texting you, and I'm not available. I will reach out when I have a moment, and I'm not sure when that is, but I'll reach back out when I have a moment. Or If you're on the phone with somebody, let's say they're getting really intense on the other line, and you can feel your nervous system kind of getting really activated, you can say, I love you and I need to get off the phone right now.
That's good. Yeah. Sometimes you can plan your boundary setting if it's an ongoing issue that you know that happens, such as mom gets into rages on the phone. And then you can say, okay, Mom, I just want you to know if you start to escalate or if you start to raise your voice at me, I'm going to get off the phone, just so that you are aware of that. And then you can tell them kind of ahead of time. And then when it happens in the moment, like you've already prepped the person, right? So then when it happens, it's not a surprise to them anymore. You're just enforcing the boundary that you've already set. Okay, remember when we talked that if you started yelling, I was going to get off the phone. I'm going to get off the phone now, going through the next thing. I think a lot of times when people don't have the confidence, their boundary comes out like almost like they feel like a mouse is talking, like, oh, please don't. Well, maybe if you could not do this. And it's this long, drawn out thing. What I'm hearing you say is really keep it short and more direct. So we don't want anybody to miss what we're trying to communicate to them in these situations. Just be short, clear, to the point.
Yes. And one of the things I think that I really want to emphasize on the back end is people think, well, then they won't be upset with me if I just say it a certain way. And that's when we go on and on and on because we're trying to manage their response or their reaction or their emotions, and we can't. So when we go, okay, they may respond well and they may not. And I can't control how this is going to land for the person. I can only manage how I say it and feel really good about how I said it and feel like I came with a regulated, as much as I could, nervous system. And I said it in the most centered way I could. So what was my centered message? My centered message was, it's not okay to yell at me and I'm going to get off the phone now. I kind of explained you don't even have to say the word boundary. I explained that if you start yelling, I'm going to get off the phone. I love you and I'll talk to you later. It's more your centered message and you're centered in your nervous system. Those go hand in hand.
And even I think adults and children respond similarly, because when we think about setting boundaries, a lot of times we think about that in terms of discipline with children. No, you're not allowed to run in the house, those types of things. And if you give this long, drawn out explanation about, now, if you run, then this could happen and that could happen, and your message of what you're trying to convey can actually get lost in the shuffle rather than just saying, this is the line in the sand. And I think adults are similar. I mean, would you agree with that? Like, just respond similarly to the message.
For sure. I think one of the most important things is if we aren't clear and direct, the person has no idea what you're saying. I'm working with couples, especially. They're like, well, I know you're really trying to be helpful, which is nice. That's a good front end kind of acknowledgement. But then they go on and on and on. And then they'll say, and I just wish we could have a little more connection time. And I'm like, okay, what are you exactly saying? Oh, you want the person to put the phone down when you're at dinner, turn the phones off, so you can have more connection time. So that's more clear and direct rather than making it this big, broad invitation where the other person feels so overwhelmed and lost and not clear on what you're saying. So it can be helpful to the other person's nervous system, even though they may not like it, to be more specific. Then they can decide whether they want to do that or not. So if someone says, I would love to have where we put our phones away for dinner, would you be willing to do that? And they say no, then you got it. Then you have to deal with your own feelings around that.
Yeah, I think this is good because I know that I've worked with a lot of women who think that they are communicating something to their spouse. And I won't understand it, what they're trying to communicate that they're saying. And I'm like, okay, so let's boil this down to like, what is it that you actually want? That knowing what you actually want can be a really good precursor to setting a boundary or communicating with someone else about something. And that I think you can kind of cue in just being more mindful internally. What is it that I would like in this relationship? I want more connection. Okay, so if you had more connection, what would that look like? Oh, he wouldn't be texting on the phone during dinner. Okay. Well, that's a pretty clear behavior that could be changed by someone. that you're asking. I think sometimes if a man hears, I want more connection, well, I mean, that could mean 20 different things. What does that mean? I think that this is a really good concept for people when they're creating the boundary. I like what you said earlier, and I wanted to circle back around to it and not miss it. You talked about writing down what you want to say, and I definitely have made some bullet points on a Post-it note in the past for things that I wanted to make sure that I communicated to people in my life, especially when I knew they were going to be hard, heavy, emotional conversations. Sometimes you can't be 100% regulated. You're going to be nervous in that conversation, or it's going to be hard. And you may forget things because of that emotional reactivity you were talking about. So just having those 1 or 2 points that's kind of like the bottom line message that you want to come across with, I think is so valuable and beneficial.
Yes, I've worked with several clients where they had an emotionally unavailable parent. What does that mean? Like the parent wasn't available to acknowledge their feelings or hear what they had to say or really be attuned to them. I had one client, and what I had typically is I'll do a letter writing exercise. This is not to give them. This is for you to get clarity on what are you wanting specifically from, like, what are you hoping to get out of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
So they write the letter, and then we do 3 bullets of what are you asking for? What are the 3 central messages? What are your centered messages that you are trying to communicate? And you put it in the 3 bullet points. And then when you go into the conversation, it's okay to take the letter. It's okay to take the bullet point Post-it. It's okay to take those or put it in your phone to have something to reference, because your brain will then cue when we get anxious. Sometimes we can go in fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is that people pleasing response, or even flop, where you kind of just faint, like your nervous system gets overwhelmed. This can help you kind of cue the brain on, oh yes, this is what I was trying to say. You feel more confident and clear in what you're communicating. And that can be really helpful when you're having hard conversations or trying to communicate a boundary, what's okay, what's not okay with you, or what you're wanting or needing. It's more clear and specific.
Yeah. So I wanted to go through a couple scenarios. And I think you've already gave us some great examples and language and talked about the acknowledgement sandwich. So I'm going to give you a couple maybe that are hard, more in terms of relationally, right? Like if someone we don't know asks us to do something, it might be a little bit easier to say no to it versus when someone asks something of us that we really want to please that person, or we have a close relationship and we're afraid that somehow that relationship might get threatened if we set a boundary. I'll read you one of these and I'd love for you to just respond. Okay?
That sounds wonderful.
Let's just say that your close friend asks you to help with the school fundraiser coming up next month. And now this is not just showing up for it, but it's planning, there's preparation, and then actually showing up. And so due to family and work commitments, you don't feel like you can add one more thing on your plate right now. What do you tell her?
Thank you so much for asking for me to help with the fundraiser. I know you've got a lot on your plate. I so wish I could help, and unfortunately I can't right now. Let me know in the future if you need help, and maybe at that time I'll have more bandwidth.
Good. I still feel like you like me when you said that.
Oh, good.
Because maybe
you still
that's
feel connected.
Yes, like able to keep the relational connection, because if someone's asking you to do something, they know that you would be a good person for that probably. Like maybe you've done fundraisers in the past, or maybe you're a person that they know is going to show up and actually get the work done that needs to be done. So that is somewhat of an honor to be asked to do something like that.
It is. And it feels good to us. If we're honest, a lot of times it feels good that we're chosen, because maybe our inner child says, well, I was always picked last in gym class, or no one ever wanted to sit with me. And so that little part of you inside says, oh, that feels so nice to be picked.
Yes.
And yet we know we don't have the energy or the time, because it'll take us away from what we need to pour into, which might be our child, our newborn, our husband that needs our attention, or another family member, or even yourself, right? Maybe you're just at a burnout point and you're feeling really run down and your tank is empty. You don't have it to offer. And that's okay. Like we are so conditioned to be givers. And when the tank is low, I'm not at my best self. And then that brings shame of I'm not a good enough mom, or I'm not good enough wife, or I'm not a good enough boss, fill in the blank. And then I don't have the energy to really kind of recover because I'm sleep deprived, I'm exhausted, whatever. I'm giving out too much and my tank is too low. So then I don't have it to give what matters most to me.
Yeah.
So it's so important that we are giving ourselves permission to identify when your tank is low, a boundary is necessary.
I interviewed a cancer survivor recently who talked about accepting your limitations, but also not being defined by those limitations, finding a balance and just respecting his energy level and what he has to give. And he has to say no to a lot of different things due to still being on a maintenance dose of chemotherapy and so forth. It was interesting to have that conversation because I think that it's hard and somewhat painful sometimes for us to admit our limitations, to admit that we have a low level of bandwidth or that we're exhausted right now, or because of our mental health struggles, we're not able to do something. That's a hard admittance sometimes for people.
It is because the shame tells us you should do it. You should be a giver. You should be a good Christian. You should be a good person. You should be a good mom. You should be a good volunteer. Like the shame stories that we have and the conditioning block us from actually taking care of ourselves and list. Because once we get to the body shutdown, we are really depleted. Like if we're getting sick, we are getting run down. Like the body has tried to give us signals all along, but we've pushed through and now the body is saying, screaming at us, I am begging you to set these boundaries. I am begging you to listen to me that I can't keep going. But the shame says, oh, but what are they going to think if I say no? See, the shame stories are big and they block us from having the healthy boundaries many times.
Absolutely.
So watching the shame stories, those should, and that guilt really is an invitation for us to go, okay, I need to kind of regroup here. I need to take a pause. And sometimes taking a pause to give you some time to come up with how you're going to respond is okay. Thank you for asking. Let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you. So that pause sometimes can give you the space to then recenter and come back with, thank you so much for asking. I wish I had the time. Unfortunately, I don't. Keep me in mind for next time. Or you don't even have to say, keep me in mind for next time.
I have to admit that we're going to start talking about work boundaries right now. And I admit that I'm my own boss, and I imagine you're your own boss and have been for some time right now. But I have had many bosses in my day. Don't be fooled. I remember what it's like to have a boss. Don't worry. And I think a lot of times people feel like I can't set a boundary at work because my job is my livelihood and I cannot threaten my livelihood. Will you talk to us about that piece a little bit? Because I feel like we're in the day and age where employers will just push and push and push the envelope to burn people out and sometimes don't care.
This is a whole different world now with the phones and we're mobile.
Yes.
So the boundaries feel very diffuse. Like we feel like we should respond to the email right away, or they're going to think I'm not working, or they're going to think I'm not doing my job. So there's a lot of fear in setting with authority figures, so to speak, where it feels like your livelihood is tied to your performance. And oftentimes I'll work a lot with clients on, okay, let's really take a look at what's realistic for you to be able to do and what isn't. And the lines are very blurry there, right? Because they feel like they should be doing all of this. And then we'll walk into, okay, what are you really wanting to say to your boss? Like pretend like, or I'm your boss. What would you really want to say to your boss? And it's scary. So their brains kind of have to fight, flight, or freeze response, or fawn, right? Like we talked about. That survival state response, that they don't feel like they have a voice. And so we'll work on, okay, what if we said something along these lines? And this is just an example. I am so grateful for this job. I love working here. And maybe you don't. So you have to tweak this based on what's real and true for you. So it's authentic. We don't want it to be inauthentic.
Authenticity is good. Yes.
So important. And I'm just feeling this sense of overwhelm, and be specific. Here's what I think, come up with solutions. What I think would be helpful is if we could, here's what I think I can still meet deadlines with. And here's what I'm not sure I'm not going to be able to meet this deadline realistically. So I come up with a solution. Here's some ideas on how I could have so-and-so really help me with this piece or that piece. Oftentimes we get into, I've got to do it without thinking about other solutions or options.
Yes, that's very true. Knowing how to delegate or how to work as a team or ask for help, those are all like very important skills to have in these situations.
When we can say, I feel overwhelmed and I kind of feel like I'm knocking at the door of burnout, those are important conversations now that really a lot of companies are talking about because their employees are burned out. And is this a healthy environment? This is the other thing. Sometimes we have to explore, is this a healthy environment for you? If not, and this can be a journey, this isn't overnight, do we start looking for other options that might be a healthier fit for you?
Yeah.
That you're going to be able to have some limits. And so at 5:00, you're done. So some folks just need a healthier environment. It depends on the health of the organization too. So if you have this conversation and it's not received well, then we have to process on the back end what comes up for you. Is this the best fit for you? Is this the best job for you? Now, that's not always, sometimes it is a great job and it is a great fit. And it's worth exploration to say, what is my fear if I speak up? A lot of times it's, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to get the promotion. They're going to think I can't handle it. I'm just naming a few, right?
Sure.
They're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of failure. And when we can process what's really at the root of that, then we start having a voice. So there's an important concept here, I think, when we talk about boundaries, it's not talked about often, that is essential. And as therapists, you've heard of this before, but we look at the human developmental continuum. I'm going to throw this out there because I think it can really be helpful for people when they're looking at workplace boundaries or boundaries in a family system or in a marriage or in a partnership or with their children. There's a concept called individuation and separation. Okay, this is differentiation.
Yes.
So in a family system, if you're allowed to have your own thoughts, feelings, and opinions, and it's okay, it's celebrated, it's a normal part of human development, it's not a threat to the system. The system can say, it's okay, this is normal for you to question things, for you to kind of integrate what your own thoughts and feelings and opinions about it to land on what resonates for you. If we weren't allowed to do that in a family system, we are going to struggle with boundaries.
That makes a lot of sense.
If we weren't allowed to differentiate yourself from this, like the thoughts and feelings and opinions of the family, you weren't allowed to have your own kind of questioning and exploration and question things. And you could do that in the family and you could feel differently about something. And that was okay. It wasn't a threat to the system. You're going to feel more confident having a boundary.
Yes.
If you didn't get that, and it was, which a lot of people didn't, right? That it was threatening to the system. You were disciplined, you were punished, you were shamed, you were not allowed to kind of explore your own thoughts, feelings, and opinions. It's going to be very scary to say how you feel. So a lot of times what we work on is being able to have your own thoughts, feelings, and opinions without feeling like you're scared, that you're going into a survival state and trying to fawn or people please, right? Or you shut down and you just go into freeze if someone gets upset with you. We're building that window of tolerance that to tolerate that it's okay if they have a different opinion. It's not okay if they yell at you, but it's okay if they get sad over something that you're like, oh, it's okay. You're not responsible for managing that emotion. So in the workplace, when you can go, it's okay for me to say, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. We then have more centeredness and a voice. So that individuation process is very important to explore when we set boundaries.
Yes, absolutely. In the sense of, a lot of family dynamics, there's a level of codependency, not just in homes with people who have substance abuse issues, but in other homes as well, where it was like, well, we had to do please mom at all costs or please dad at all costs. And then if we went against anything on that, there was maybe harsh punishment because it was dad's way or the highway. I find that in those situations, yes, boundaries are very difficult. And a lot of times I work with my clients on kind of like goals of adolescence, maybe that they never achieved, because I really feel like what you're talking about is part of a goal of adolescence. Is like you go out, you explore the world, you decide what you like and don't like, you decide what things you want to take from your family and what things you don't. And in some situations, that was not allowed. Kids were very sheltered or shamed for having a difference of opinion or thinking on their own. This is definitely very relevant. So let's say that your boss asks you to take on a large project for work. It's not a requirement, but but it definitely would help your career. Might say you ace this project, it would give you a promotion. You're also in the process of caring for your elderly mother. Don't feel you have the mental and emotional energy to give your best work to this project. Additional work hours, additional stress, and you don't want to disappoint your boss and are afraid of maybe hurting your career or not getting that promotion. What do you say?
This is so big to unpack. There's so many
Lots of layers.
Lots of layers. And it depends on what do you want? Like, how badly do you want the promotion? On a 0 to 10, I have people do a lot of scaling so they can get more clarity on their internal needs and wants. They'll go on a 0 to 10, 10 being, I'll do whatever it takes. 100% I want the promotion. 0, I don't really want it at all. If we weren't allowed to differentiate, we don't even explore, why do I want that? It's like the first step. Yeah. Or are we doing an automatic response? Like, that's the next step. I need the promotion. And that's like my next thing. I'm not even looking at, do I really want it? Why do I really want it? Can I even handle it? So let's say you do really want it, just to play this out. Let's say you really want promotion and you're still taking care of your elderly mother. Here's the bottom line. You're going to need help.
Yes.
So I am much more rooted in reality and the reality rather than the fantasy of what we think we can do. The reality is you won't be able to do both. Well, I mean, you won't be able to do it all. We know this. It's a fantasy if I think I can do it all. Something's going to give, and it's going to be my health. It's going to be, I'm going to feel resentful towards my mom, the job. I'm going to go to burnout. So I think the first thing when we look at that is, am I willing to ask for help?
Yes.
If I'm not, I'm probably not going to be able to do this promotion well. And it's probably going to be a cost to me. So I think the first thing is asking yourself, what do I want? Am I willing to ask for help? And let's say you are. Let's say you're like, yes, I can do it. Okay, I think being transparent with the boss and saying, and I know this is feeling I'm about authenticity requires transparency. And that the truth shall set you free. Now, it's a healthy work environment. They're going to go, oh, that makes sense to me. If you say something like, I really, really would love to take this promotion. This is something I'm passionate about. I really am excited about. And I want to let you know I'm taking care of my elderly mom. And there may be times where I might have an emergency and I've got to buzz out or I have to take care of my mom. I'm going to be seeing if I can get some help with my mom. I wanted to let you know up front to be transparent. So my nervous system then goes, okay, I've told them up front. I was transparent up front about what's going on so they know. And maybe they're not comfortable giving you the promotion at that time. That's a risk you run. But transparency leads to freedom. If we're hiding, we're maneuvering, we're trying to act like we have it all together, that will lead you down the road to exhaustion. Yeah. It will lead you down to the road to unfulfillment and dissatisfaction and resentment. Every time I'm like, play the movie out. I'll say something to a client, like I'll go, okay, play the movie out like you get the promotion and you're taking care of your elderly mom. Tell me what you see in the movie. And they're like, I can't do it. I'm burned out, exhausted. I'm like, okay, so what would you need in order to take the promotion and take care of your mom? So we get more clarity when we play the movie out of what is real for me, what will work for me, what won't work for me. And now we have to work on the courage to say it out loud. That's the hardest part, typically, is saying it out loud because we're scared they won't consider us for the promotion. But in the reality of things, when you're transparent, builds trust. Transparency builds trust. It's whenever there's a betrayal, we know that transparency is essential to rebuild that trust over time. So when you're with a boss and you're transparent, the boss goes, oh, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Yeah. If you have a healthy boss, right? So there's a lot of layers to this to consider when setting a boundary.
Yeah, for sure. And I've definitely been in environments where I was transparent and it was used against me. And of course, that made me pull back and not want to be transparent. So recognizing like what your relationship is with your supervisor and how that information is going to be utilized. I do find that people are much more understanding when we're upfront about things versus when we're not.
And we don't have to overshare. That's the other key. You don't have to give every detail. It's a high level. I'm taking care of my elderly mom. And if it's not received well, that's information for us.
Yes.
Evaluate whether the long term this is going to be a healthy place of employment. And that's key information. Like you said, it's used against you, which definitely happens. Is this going to be a long-term healthy environment for you to continue to work in?
Right.
And that's scary for people to think about changing, right? Their place of employment. And it can also be empowering when they do decide to make a change, whatever that looks like.
I was in what I would consider a toxic work environment for a period. And what I realized in that process was there were a couple of times they would vacillate between we love you, we hate you. And when they loved me, they loved me. And when they hated me, they hated me. But when they were on the downswing, they would say, well, we're just not really sure that this job is a good fit for you. And I think that I took that inadequacy shame piece, like, oh, I'm not enough. I'm not living up to the expectations. And it's so interesting to be out of that environment and to be on the other side now saying, they were right. That job wasn't a good fit for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just didn't fit the fullness of who I was and what I wanted and how I wanted to show up for clients. That wasn't me. And it's okay that it wasn't me. Made for somebody else.
I could see you even lit up, like the freedom you felt like they were right. That wasn't the right job for me. It was stifling you. It wasn't expanding you.
Yes.
Full gifts. It was stifling you.
Yeah, but it's hard sometimes when you're in the middle of it. And I think that's why talking to someone like a healthy friend, family member, or a counselor can help you process through some of these things to know, like, this is what they're saying and this is what I'm sensing and what's your objectivity on it. Because you can feel in those type of toxic work environments where the expectations are too high, sometimes you can start to feel a little crazy or inadequate. Like, well, I mean, I see other people maybe doing this or they're expecting that I do this, so I must be able to do it. And that's just not always the case.
Yes. And I think talking through it, because sometimes our work environments mirror our family dynamics that we grew up in. So it's hard to see clearly because we're reenacting almost like the same system we grew up in. We just don't know because it just seems normal to us. It seems familiar until you start doing your own healing work. And then you're like, oh, I recreated the same family system dynamic at work. Oh, and I did that in my other romantic relationship.
Yes.
And there's the light bulb. That's why that self-awareness piece and understanding families, not to blame anybody, because that's not the idea. The idea is empowerment to go, I can break the chain of this dynamic. I can see now the parallel between my work environment and my home environment and how I put myself in that same role and didn't recognize it.
I know that Christians a lot of times struggle feeling like I have to say yes. I've got to help people. God wants me to be giving. God wants me to be hospitable. And how would you really encourage these individuals that it is okay to say no sometimes and you're still a good Christian?
I love the and in both. I can be a loving, caring, compassionate person as long as I'm having boundaries. I can still be that, but I might be resentful. I might be worn out. I might be angry because now I'm giving and I might take on a martyrdom role. God doesn't want us to you'll have some people, maybe your family system that they were like, I've done everything. I've given here, I've given there. And now they've taken on this, look at me, I've done everything role. And they feel bitter and resentment. And it comes in between their relationships that matter the most, maybe with their child, maybe with their partner, maybe with their church group. That can lead, if we don't have boundaries, it's hard to be our best giving self because I'm giving and there's resentment tied to it. We want to be giving because we are led to be like, oh, I want to do that because I feel filled up. I now have enough to pour out and I don't expect anything back. Like there is no ties to needing anything back. I'm doing it because it's pure agape love. Like I'm just letting it flow from my soul. If I'm doing it out of I should be doing this consistently, you're going to be on the road to resentment and expectations or resentments waiting to happen. Like we're just going to feel a level of burnout and resentment that doesn't feel good to us. And we're going to be like, why am I even doing this? No one cares. No one even acknowledges me. A thank you is wonderful. And I love a good and we don't want to do it to get a thank you.
Yes, that's true.
It's icing on the cake. Like that's why I love acknowledgement because it feels so good to our nervous system because we all want to feel seen, appreciated, understood, and loved so much. And when we are filling our tanks up, we can give that out freely And it feels so amazing to just give it without any expectation back. It's icing on the cake.
Tell us a little bit about where to find you and what you have going on.
Close the Chapter podcast is probably the best place to find me. And then on Instagram and Facebook, all the socials at Kristen D Boice. And then if you want a free journal that I love to give out to my clients, and it's free, you can reuse it because I'm a big journaler and I believe in it in terms of getting clarity from the Holy Spirit. Like, it just is so powerful to get centered at Kristen, KRISTEND, Boice, BOICE.com/free resources, and it will be emailed to your inbox. And what I love about that is I love how God gave us the breath to kind of come back, reground us in nature and all these gifts. And if we can come back to ourselves and listen to the leading and have clarity, that is the leading. That isn't our fear talking. That's the Holy Spirit talking. Our nervous systems are freed up, and there's so much healing that can take place when that happens. So I'm a firm believer in journaling. I love it. That's why I want to give it to everybody. I'm like, here, because everybody's like, well, I don't really like journaling. And what am I going to write about? And this helps kind of guide the process.
That's awesome. I like that. Since this podcast is called Hope for Anxiety and OCD, we like our guests to share a story of hope at the end, a time where you received hope from God or another person.
There's so many, really what came through to me when I was praying over this question. I was thinking about a client just came through, and I'm not going to give specifics, but when I work with people that you feel like, how are they ever going to recover from this loss or this trauma? And you think, how can they get up in the morning? How are they going to move when you've lost all your children due to a tragedy? How are you going to ever recover from that? And I've seen over and over and over again how God pours into the pain. And once we work and acknowledge the pain, God can tend to it and walk alongside us in it. I always think like Jesus walking hand in hand with us, going, I know, honey, I know it hurts. And I know this is so painful and you can't understand it right now. Yeah. And I'm right here with you, just holding the pain for you. And that's a privilege of seeing God's transformation with some of the most painful things anyone could ever go through. And the second piece that came to me is, as a community, we had a school shooting back in, it was several years ago. No one would have ever expected that to happen in our backyard. And as a community, it opened us up in such a way for healing, for us to come together, love one another, acknowledge each other's pain and fear. So there was so much transformation that happened in a whole community. And as a result, I do every other week, this isn't about me, but as a result, not of just the shooting, but of the pandemic, Mental Health Monday with our mayor on Facebook. And now we're talking about mental health. We're talking about all these hard topics. Like, here we are trying to hold the pain and acknowledge people's pain in the midst of all of this. And we came together despite a trauma and a tragedy. So those are the two things that came to me when you were asking that question.
Mental Health Monday with the mayor. That's a lot of M's, but I like it.
It is. We don't say with the mayor. I just was adding that piece. It's just called Mental Health Mondays.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom. I think this is going to be very practical for people who are looking to set boundaries, and then also identifying throughout, we kind of identified some things that get in the way of people who are struggling with anxiety of setting boundaries.
Thank you, Carrie, so much for having me on and the work you're doing in the world.
I hope you found this episode on boundaries helpful. As a follow-up, since I recorded this episode with Kristen, I wanted to share with you a couple boundaries that I set recently in my life. I've been pretty protective over my evening times because that's time that I have to spend with my daughter and my husband. Someone wanted to interview me for their counseling class where they needed to interview a counselor. And I thought, this would be really great. I want to be able to help this student out. But with her schedule, she was only going to be able to interview me in the evening. And I said, that's going to be just too much for me. So she had decided that she could email me the questions, and that she said I would have to transcribe your responses anyway. So if I email you the questions, will you send me an audio or will you type up the answers? And obviously, since I talk all the time, that was really easy for me. So I was able to get it done relatively quickly and help her out while at the same time protecting and guarding my evening time, which was really good. I had another situation where someone wanted to get together with me, ask some questions about private practice. I knew that my schedule was pretty jam-packed, but I said, hey, I'm going to be dropping my husband off for physical therapy at this day and time, and there's a Starbucks right around the corner. If you can meet me there, I'd be happy to meet with you and talk to you while he's in physical therapy. So it ended up working out, and I found out that person actually probably drove about 30 minutes and arranged their schedule to be able to meet with me, which was really kind. But we were able to kind of be on the same page and both get our needs met, which was really cool. And I know that things don't always work out this way. If that person had said, no, I can't do that day, or time, we may have just parted ways at that point. But it's always nice, like, when we can kind of let other people know, like, hey, I want to help you, and this is what I'm able to do in order to be able to do that. And unfortunately, I'm not able to do, X, Y, Z. What I would like you to hear from both of these examples is that your needs are important and other people's needs are important. So finding that balance of loving and serving others while at the same time maintaining healthy boundaries. This is our last episode for the year as my assistant and I take some time for self-care, planning, and preparation for next year. Got some great shows for you. January is going to be all about anxiety. February is going to be all about OCD. We're going to pull some things back to the basics, do some frequently asked questions episodes. It's going to be awesome. Then around the first week of March, I've decided to launch a course for Christians who are struggling with OCD. This is a big need that I've seen out there as I've been doing this podcast and communicating with my clients. I'm super excited to be able to bring that to you guys. And of course, I will tell you all about it in the upcoming months. Definitely follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or sign up for our email list to learn more. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and restful holiday season. I will be back with you the first Wednesday in January. Over Anxiety and OCD is a production of By the Well Counseling. Our show is hosted by me, Carrie Bach, licensed professional counselor in Tennessee. Opinions given by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself or By the Well Counseling. Our original music is by Brandon Mangrum. Until next time, may you be comforted by God's great love for you.